Hello and good evening. Welcome to the April Whisky Me live online tasting. You can probably tell that I'm not Tristan. Tristan's currently in Mexico, traveling around and writing a book on tequila. So I've been asked to step in this evening. I'm Tom. I'm the co-founder of Whisky Me and co-owner of Whisky Me. And obviously it's a pleasure to have you joining us tonight. We've got a couple of incredible brands, which most of you, I'm sure, will have received the liquids from. And we're going to be joined by Scott Adamson from Tomatin Distillery, which produce Bòcan. And we're going to talk a bit about the Creation series Creations number 5, the one that's we've featured this month. And then we're also going to go and have a chat with Gareth McAllister from Ahascragh Distillery and talk specifically about Colla, which is an Irish whiskey, a fantastic Irish whiskey, an 11-year-old as well. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Scott. Hello, Scott.
Hey, Tom. Good evening. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. Good. I'll say we only saw each other last night, didn't we? Because we actually did the first ever in-person tasting at Black Rock for both Black Rock followers and Whisky Me, which was great.
Yeah, it was a great evening. It was great to go down to Black Rock. I've not been down before, as I said, so fantastic little bar. So anyone that's in London, absolutely pop in. It's a nice kind of refreshing approach to getting people into whiskey, very similar to Whisky Me, just kind of breaking down a lot of those barriers. I really enjoyed it.
No, I'm glad. No, it was great. Like I say, we had a full house, which was fantastic. So hopefully we'll do more of that sort of stuff. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Obviously, you are working with and sort of representing Bòcan specifically, but also obviously being part of Tomatin Distillery as well. So a lot of the guys, I guess, that are watching and followers of Whisky Me will probably be familiar or maybe slightly more familiar with Tomatin as a distillery and as a single malt. But it'd be great if you could tell us a bit more about the sort of synergies between Tomatin and Bòcan, how that works, you know, and what the kind of ethos is with Bòcan, what it's all about. And I think, you know, this one that we've got this month, particularly looking at the casks, which are really, really interesting, and tell us a bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tomatin as a distillery, it's just to the south of Inverness, and it was established in 1897, so it's been around for a while. And the style of spirit that it's known for producing today under the Tomatin single malt brand is elegant but complex. One of our old distillery managers used to call it spirit in 3D. There's so much going on there. It's very fruit forward, but it's a really elegant spirit. It's really clean. And it's a far more traditional kind of brand in terms of the sort of ethos behind it, the maturation, the styles of whiskey that we're putting out there. But it wasn't always that style of spirit. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the style of spirit made at Tomatin, much like all of the Highland and Speyside distilleries, would have been lightly peated. We moved away from that in the 1960s to develop this really fruit-forward spirit that would become almost the backbone of many of the blended whiskies. You know, in the 1970s, Tomatin was the biggest distillery in the world. 99% of the whiskey being made there was being put into your Johnny Walkers, Dewars, Cutty Sarks, J&Bs. And they were looking for a non-peated whiskey. And that's what we continue to produce to this day. But in the 1990s and early thousands, we were moving more into the brand side. And today we're a much smaller distillery. We focus on our own products. And what we realized in the early thousands was the price of peated malt was starting to really increase for the blends that we use. And we decided that in the last week of production of 2005, we would bring in some lightly peated barley and distill it. With the intention of using it for blends. The problem with that was as soon as the distillery manager at the time, Dougie Campbell, smelled it coming off the stills, he was blown away with the quality of it, and it reminded him of the style of spirit that was made at Tomatin when he was a young lad. And he started filling it into some really good casks to lay the bedrock for it to become a single malt. Then in 2013, we decided to launch this whiskey, but it was very much a discussion as, does it become a subcategory of Tomatin or is it a totally different brand? And we went with it being a totally different brand, predominantly because it's not just a peated Tomatin. There's more going on behind the scenes there. There's often different fermentation times. There's different distillation regimes and things like that. So everything that goes into this whiskey is slightly different from how we produce Tomatin It's lightly peated, it's oilier, it's heavier. We still only make it for the last week of production every year. So this spirit is only made for 1 week every year. And then we fill it into a wide variety of casks. And create a range of Bòcans from that. And what we're looking at tonight specifically is Creation 5, part of our Creation series. And the Creations are really cool because at their core, these whiskies are about unlocking unusual flavors. Now, that can be through marrying casks that have never been married before. So Creation 1 was a marriage of Muscatel and Imperial Stout casks. So you've got this sweet orange and bitter kind of tobacco note. It was really lovely. But the more experimental side of that is using casks that nobody has ever used before. Creation 2 had Japanese shochu casks, and Creation 5 that we've got tonight is the first Scotch whisky to be matured in Colombian Andean oak casks. And it just gives us totally different flavors from anything anyone would have tried in whisky before.
So I didn't realise, you see, up until right now, and I might be wrong here in my assumption, but correct me if I am, is that, so you're producing only for a week per year, the actual distillate, the cask character, the distillate that you want to make, but actually you're filling them into a variety of different casks at the same time. So my understanding was, obviously, let's say with Creations 5, you would distill it all in one go and then just put it all into Andean oak casks, for example. But no, actually you're putting it in a variety of different casks and then giving yourself the option to blend from them or find ones that are particularly good.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2005 was the first year that we laid this spirit down. Like I say, we did that for a week. And within that week, you get 60,000 litres. So when I say it's only been made for a week, we're not talking about a tiny amount of liquid. That's the size of a small distillery nowadays. Yeah. So last December was our 18th distillation of Bòcan. In that time, we've filled this spirit into over 60 different types of wood. Different types of casks. So we'll make the new make spirit, but waiting for that new make spirit will be sherry casks, virgin oak casks. You'll have some Cabernet Sauvignon casks from Morocco. You'll have weird kind of oaks. We've just filled some Bulgarian virgin oaks. So what we'll also do is we'll lay a lot of the spirit down into refill casks. And then at some point in time, if we get access to a really cool cask, we'll finish it in those casks. And that's what's happened here. So Creation 5 is from the 2011 distillation. And in 2021, it was moved into the Colombian oak. So it spent the first 10 years in refill casks. Yeah. And then a little over a year in the Colombian oak. And as I was mentioning to you last night, for me, a year is quite a short finish. Within the general kind of stable of Tomatin, we typically look at 2-3 years finishing as a minimum. But these casks were so incredibly active in that 1 year that we almost had to get the spirit out to stop it from overcooking. We were running the risk of it almost being too cask-led rather than the spirit shining through.
Yeah. What with the Andean oak? I mean, I can't think personally of any circumstance where I've ever even read about Andean oak being used in spirit or, say, wine production. I don't know much about wine, but are there any other specific uses within alcohol that Andean oak has been used for that you know of, or is it a first?
So I first came across it through Mount Gay Rum. They had released a limited edition of a rum matured in Andean oak casks, and that's what kind of piqued my interest in terms of, right, we need to see if we can track some of these casks down for our spirit. Since we've launched this, almost in a little bit of a flurry, there's been things like, I think Black Bottle have released a blend in Andean oak. I believe Bruichladdich might have released an Andean oak whiskey recently. So I think everyone must have got the phone call at the same time from Colombia that there was some cool casks.
What was the Colombian Richard? It was
Colombian Richard, yeah.
Only from the story you told us last night about that, which is fascinating, and I would like you to share probably a slightly briefer version, but how long it took you to get hold of these casks? Because
so
it's quite incredible the lengths that were gone to get these casks in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, normally when we order casks, we expect them at the distillery within a couple of months, barring any kind of hold-ups at port and stuff like that. These casks took the best part of 4 years to get to the distillery. 3 years. I first got contacted by a guy called Richard in 2018. And that's what I was saying last night, not a very Colombian name, Colombian Richard. So, and we ordered the casks there and then, and they didn't arrive at the distillery until 2021, so 3 years later. And it was a mix of things, the trees grow at 3,500 meters along a chain of active volcanoes. So naturally, they're a little bit difficult to get to. There was an incredible rainy season in the Andes Mountains. There was bureaucratic stuff down at the cooperage. When the casks finally did get made, this is all going on when COVID's happening as well. When the casks finally are available to ship, there's no shipping containers because there's a boat sideways in the Suez Canal. And it was just one thing after another. I remember every 3 months being less and less convinced that these casks were going to arrive, to the point that when they did, my response to the distillery manager was, we're not expecting anything. And sure enough, it was these casks. It took a long time, but I think they were definitely worth the wait in terms of the character that we've got from them. Yeah,
absolutely. I was going to say as well, in terms of the creation series, obviously, as I understand it, you've got, I think am I right in thinking that the next one releases like this week?
Yeah, it's the 22nd. So I guess that'll be Monday. The next Creation 6 will be coming out on Monday. So that's definitely that's going back towards the flavor-led side of things. So where Creation 5 was an experimental cask type, Creation 6 has been inspired by rum and raisin ice cream, if you want. And so we've created a whiskey with those flavors by using different casks. And again, that goes back to maybe more the creative element of Creations, whereas Creation 5 sits on the experimental side of the spectrum.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I look forward to that. I got a chance to try it, but I'd have to maybe pick a bottle of that up at some point. One thing in terms of the, as I say, the kind of Bòcan as a brand, a standalone brand, and what it does, really, it's like the fun. I don't mean that Tomatin's not fun, but it's kind of like the experimental fun element of what Tomatin is, right? As in, Tomatin's a well-established, very old distillery with a great sort of history of production. Bòcan's all about experimentation and trying new things and putting liquid, the liquid in the whiskey into a different position, I guess, in terms of the people that are maybe looking at drinking it. How does that work in terms of, the messaging and who consumes Bòcan versus Tomatin, for example, and how does that sort of feel in terms of positioning? Because obviously you're talking about a very different thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's an interesting one because I think everyone at Tomatin kind of approaches all the whiskey we make as whiskies for everyone, and you don't have to fit a demographic to like a specific liquid, but within that, what I would say is I think what Tomatin does really well is it truly offers something for every consumer. So you've got things like Legacy and 12-year-old, which are really cracking, easy drinking single malts. The Legacy is the sort of whiskey that you can have it in your house and it doesn't matter who's visiting. They're going to enjoy this, whether they're new to whiskey or they've been drinking it for decades. They'll love a Tomatin Legacy. Then you go throughout the range and we've got the 14-year-old, which is matured in Symington port casks. We're one of only 2 distilleries to access these casks. And then all the way up to a 50-year-old single cask release and everything in between. So Tomatin has to almost be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And it's great because it's a really versatile spirit and we're able to do that. Whereas Bòcan definitely, it's a funny thing because I think it's experimental in nature, and we find ourselves within the whiskey enthusiast category, the people that like experimentation and they're looking to try new and exciting things. But what's also really cool is that there's another group of consumers who are not what you would call your classic whiskey enthusiasts, but they are driven by adventure. They want to try new experiences, and Bòcan fits with them really well as well. I think actually the perfect kind of consumer for Creation 5, the Creation series particularly, is Whisky Me drinkers, is visitors to the platform, people who are either new to whiskey and we're breaking down the barriers for them, or they've been drinking whiskey for a long time and they want to try something that they've never been able to try before, or they maybe wouldn't have picked up before. So little things like with the Creation series, we don't state the age on the bottle. And what that allows us to do is focus purely on flavor. So we can either, with one Creation, release a 5-year-old that's just really, really good liquid, or we can release a 15-year-old that's really, really good liquid, but keep the price the same. So it allows us to kind of erode that barrier of if you've got an age statement, you've got to pay a little bit more. we're pricing it based on quality. We're pricing it based on it being accessible and enjoyable.
I do. I have got a lot of time for that, because I think, to be honest, that there are, out there within the category, there are whiskies that are phenomenal, but not necessarily that old. And likewise, there are also whiskies that are age statement led, but also not that good, right? And I do think that in terms of, consumption of whiskey and enjoying it, I suppose that the key point is, obviously it's there to be enjoyed. And so I think ultimately it comes down to the liquid, right? It doesn't really matter the age, so long as the liquid, and it's all subjective as well.
Yeah.
The liquid itself has to tell the story, right? And you want to find things that are, unique, that taste great, that you want to keep drinking and drink, I guess taste, sample, and then try other expressions from the same distillery or the same producer. And I think you're right in what you're saying about, the Creation series actually is tailor-made for Whisky Me and Black Rock in that respect, in that, what we try to do is to simplify whiskey for people, but also make it approachable to, people that want to get into that category, who look at it and go, well, actually, I'm actually delighted to try something a little bit different. It's whiskey, but I've never heard of Andean cask, or I've never heard of Sochu cask, or I've never tried anything like that. I think it really makes it exciting for people. So just going into tasting the liquid, we've talked a bit about how it's made, and we've got a couple of tasting notes, which I'm not sure who Ken is, but we've got an aroma of banana in there, and also there's another one here. Where is it? Another aroma of banana here from Ken. So, what would you say, or if you were looking at and again, it is entirely subjective, but what would you say are the sort of key aromatics and flavors that you would find in the Andean release?
It's interesting, because the reason that we picked these casks is that, so to take it back a little bit, one of the most important parts of maturation is obviously the addition of flavor compounds from the cask into the liquid. That can either be from previous contents or for the wood itself. With this, we're talking about a virgin oak, so it's never held anything else. And typically when we're talking about virgin oaks, we're talking about American or European oak. American oak will give you lots of sweetness, lots of vanilla, coconut. European oak will give you that kind of dried fruit, tannic sort of element. This wood is a totally different species. And when we got the analysis before we ordered the casks, it was full of a compound that is responsible for spicy flavors in whiskey. And I was really excited by that, because I love this idea of a little bit of smoke and a bit of spice kind of coming together. And there's definitely spice in there. I think there's going to be spice with any virgin oak that you use. You're going to get that woody spice. Yeah. But what I'm blown away by is that banana. What Michael's just said there, the main tasting note I came up with was this immediately took me back to when I was like 13, 14 years old, in the Scouts, in the woods, setting a campfire and putting a banana split in tinfoil on the campfire. This is the flavor for me. It blows me away. Banana bread. It's very kind of banana led, which I love, because it reminds me of a tasting I went to about 10 years ago as a punter. I was a consumer there. I think it was a Bowmore tasting. And the ambassador said, lots of flavors of banana in this. And the woman in front of me sat her glass down because she's allergic to banana. If you are allergic to banana, there is no bananas in this.
It's fascinating, actually, how, I don't know whether it's just a mental thing, but in terms of where the casks are coming from, for example, in terms of those tropical notes that you might find, let's say, from South America, even like when we talk about the latest release in terms of rum and raisin and rum casks and these types of things. Yeah, it's fascinating to me how, whether it is just it's just all in the mind or not, it feels like flavors, aromatics, and certain things that are grown within those climate come through in what it is that you're actually drinking, right? As in, you get these sort of tropical notes coming through. Yeah, absolutely. There's no way of denying it. That is rammed full of banana there. The other one that I get, the other flavour that I get is, do you remember the old sweet that we used to get in the UK, toffos? I could lie to you and say yes, but I don't remember them. Look them up. They were fantastic. Yeah. This reminds me of toffos, like a little toffee kind of sweetie. I always tend to lean to the kind of sweeter notes. I kind of go down that route. There's definitely spice in there. What's really interesting, though, quite interesting. Panicking Skywalker, mentioning a bit of a sort of grassy or dried sort of grass or hay note on the nose as well, which is quite interesting. What would you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing, is that if that's what you smell, that's what you smell.
Yeah,
you know,
true.
that's the wonder of it. I do kind of see that hay-like element, Bòcan, with that touch of smoke. So what's really interesting about it is, and we were talking about this last night, Bòcan's a whiskey where, although we say it's a lightly peated malt, the smoke, the peat, it's the seasoning rather than the main ingredient. It's that thing that brings all the other flavors together. And what I always find is that with our lightly peated spirit, there is a little bit more of a farmy kind of element to it, that barnyard hay-like thing. It's that kind of, that dusty hay barn that you get.
That.
Yeah,
I love flavors like that, aromatics like that are right on my street. I find them fascinating and great. Like that sort of, it is almost like a sort of like that wet hay type character that you get. Dry grass. I find it absolutely brilliant. And I'm a huge fan of this. I've just added a little bit of water, by the way, for anyone. We never really talk about this, but for me personally, what is it? Is it 46%?
it is. Yeah,
46%. So, just a drop of water in there as well really brings out a lot more of the aromatics and probably make them, I guess, a little bit more obvious, really, in terms of what you're looking for as well. So if anyone wants to try that, then they can do so. But thank you, Scott, obviously, for taking us through the Bòcan and a bit on Tomatin as well. And without further ado, I'm also going to introduce Gareth McAllister. Hello, Gareth.
Hi, Thomas. Hi,
How's it going? Sorry to keep you waiting there. I appreciate you coming on and joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me on. It's very interesting listening to Scott there. Anyway, I learned a lot.
Yeah. I think it's great. This is the thing that I love about these tastings is that it's really a sort of it's just a conversation around whiskey, right? And thinking about and opening it up to everyone and talking about production in a variety of different ways. Both, from, I guess, single malt Scotch, Irish and world whiskey as well. So, but no, appreciate you coming on. And as you know, we also did the tasting last night, not you and I, but with Sean over at Black Rock. And the first thing that I had to say to Sean, which I was a little bit embarrassed about, is how to correctly pronounce the name of the distillery. And I had a few cracks at it, and I got it pretty close. But am I right in thinking you would pronounce the Ahascragh Distillery or Distillers?
Yeah, the locals say Ahascragh, okay?
Ahascragh.
So you don't pronounce the GH at the end.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Irish villages and towns that end in GH, and you just don't pronounce the GH at the end. So aha, like the band, aha, and then that's how I say it. Aha, 3 syllables. It's a small, beautiful village in Galway in the west of Ireland. And it's actually anglicized Irish, anglicized Gaelic, and in Gaelic it means the town of the glacier silt deposit. There's a big mound in the town which is an old glacier silt deposit, and when you translate that, when you say that in Irish and anglicize it, it's Ahascragh. So that's very cool.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm fascinated to find out a bit more about. I guess how you got into owning a distillery and making whiskey and also making gin as well, and what that sort of journey is. Because as I understand it, it's not always been your let's say profession or your career. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, so my wife Michelle and I, we founded the company 6 years ago, 2018. But this was always we both had our separate corporate lives. I am a chemical engineer and a distiller. It was always my end goal to one day, own and run our own distillery. A big fan of whiskeys for a long time. And Michelle's passion is gin. So like when our kind of corporate lives came to an end, 6-7 years ago, we said, why don't we do this together? And it was meant to be a kind of a semi-retirement hobby project. And now it's turned into, a large operation, 35 people. We're in 18 plus countries around the world, and we are going to produce about 400,000 liters of pure alcohol this year. And hopefully that will ramp up to about 750,000 to 1 million LPA in the next few years. So
it's safe to say that it's not a retirement.
No, we're probably working harder than we ever worked before.
I was going to say, I think you're ramping up rather than slowing down. But it's interesting because we were talking last night with Sean about Irish whiskey generally, and as I understand it, it's the fastest growing luxury spirit category in the world, isn't it? I think. Is that correct?
It is, and when you project that growth out to 2030, they reckon it'll eclipse Scotch. So yeah. I hope through that. We're catching up on you guys. So,
what would you? I mean, you may not know the answer, or but it's fascinating to me to understand what that would be down to in terms of the sort of renewed interest in Irish whiskey and what's driving it. Like, which markets, and obviously we're talking about luxury spirits. So we're talking about the brands like the 11-year-old Colla, which at 68, 70 pound a bottle. Not your sort of entry-level whiskey, but what do you think is driving that? What's sort of the renewed interest?
I think a lot of it is happening in the US. There is a renaissance for Irish whiskey in the US, and of course it's been built on the groundwork that Jameson has been doing in particular over the last 20 years. I mean, Irish whiskey was on its knees up until the late 1980s, early 90s, where there was only really 2 distilleries. We'd gone from over 140 distilleries down to 2, and the 2 were obviously Bushmills and Middleton. And then with the brands that Middleton had, Powers, Paddy, Jameson, they decided to focus on Jameson, and that really kept the kind of Irish whiskey category alive. And it's not just the US; it's also Europe and Asia. And I think then we had Cooley Distillery that came in. That was the 3rd distillery that came in the late 1980s with John Teeling. And then from then we've grown as the awareness of Irish whiskey. Like a lot of people, like we spend a lot of our time in Asia, and a lot of people in Asia haven't even heard of Irish whiskey. They don't know the true story behind Irish whiskey. That, and forgive me again, Scott, that the Irish invented whiskey. And we basically handed over to the Scottish, during Prohibition, when Al Capone came looking for whiskey, and the good Irish Catholics said, no, but you can go to Scotland. And the Scottish, took over America in terms of whiskey. So we kind of, it's kind of when people hear the story and they learn about Irish whiskey, they want to try it, and that's what's happening. I think people are being very curious about the category, and it's not all Jameson. Irish whiskey, actually Jameson, and they did a great job in keeping the category alive. There's a lot more innovation in Irish whiskey, and a lot more to Irish whiskey than a single grain with some pot still in it, So,
and presumably, that's only going to go from strength to strength in terms of even what you guys are doing as far as the different releases and brands and whiskies that you've got coming out as well. And presumably you're not going to stop there, are you? There'll be, I guess, more innovation and new stuff coming. Tell us a bit about the sort of range that you guys have, because obviously the Whisky Me whiskey that we've got this month is the 11-year-old Colla. There's also a 7-year-old, isn't there, as well?
Yeah, there's a 7-year-old. Colla. The Colla range starts at 7. It is all age statement. Starts at 7 and goes up to actually 20-year-old single malt. So you're probably asking, well, how did we get our hands on this? Well, obviously, our whiskies at the moment are all sourced whiskies, and Michelle and I have been buying whiskey before people were buying casks. We were buying casks. We were putting our corporate bonuses. They were the days. They were brilliant days. We got bonuses. We were putting that into buying whiskey casks. And what we're doing with the Colla range in particular is we have been blending and finishing these whiskies over the last number of years. We've done everything in terms of maturation, finishing, blending, bottling, labeling here in Ahascragh. We just didn't distill it. It's obviously sourced liquid, and that's until our spirit that we're laying down now from our distillery is ready in a few years' time. So the Colla range does start at 7 and works its way up, and then we do have our kind of premium entry level whiskey, which is a 3 to 5-year-old triple blend of all 3 styles of Irish whiskey. So that's out there as well. And yeah, there's a lot in the pipeline coming forward.
So yeah, I was going to say, so obviously you're now distilling and you're laying whiskies down, your own whiskies that you're producing. In terms of the sort of, the styles of those from I guess a distillery character perspective, are they similar or vastly different to say what you're producing with Colla or making a bottling with Colla at the moment, or have you got a different vision for your own liquids? I say your own; they're all your own, but in terms of your own distiller.
Yeah, so we started distilling. We opened last July at the distillery, and we've been basically on single malt since then. And we do double distilled single malt, but we don't do triple distilled single malt. I take my hat off to the Scottish. They make very good single malts, and it's nearly always double distilled. So we don't want to. That there's no point in breaking. They don't change it because it works fantastic. So we've kind of, within the Irish technical file, we've done a few things that we're allowed to differentiate us from, say, a Scotch single malt. And I must say that the new make spirit, we call it our newborn, is fantastic. We've been sending it out to a few influencers and experts, and they said, yeah, you should put that in a bottle and sell it. You should enter that into some competitions. We might do that in the future. But the spirit that's coming off our stills at the moment is very, very fruity, very appley, very peary. Completely took me by surprise. Now we're a bit different in our distilling process, in our whole, brewing and distilling process. We use we separate the mashing and the filtering. We have a mash conversion vessel and we have a filter press or a mash filter. We're the only. There's ourselves and Waterford are the only distilleries that use this type of filtration mashing. We don't use a Lauterton, and that enables us to really squeeze. It's a yield, but it's also in terms of flavor. We think we're getting something different coming from that process that you'd get from a traditional distillery process. So we must send you some samples of our new make spirit and see what you think.
Well, I was going to say, when you say we've given it to a few influencers, I'm going to have to send you my address. Because I'm gonna have to taste that. So, are you able to share? I know we're not moving off topic, but just moving for a second slightly away from the 11-year-old, which obviously we've got and we've featured this month with Whisky Me. But in terms of the types of casks that you're laying your whiskies down into, are you able to share, the types of casks and what you're putting them in? Is it your sort of not typical, but traditional sort of American oak, European oak, or are you doing anything like the guys at Bòcan are doing, a bit more experimental and having a play around with a few different bits?
For the new make spirit that we're laying down now, from our distillery, no, it's invariably all the single malt is invariably going into ex-bourbon American oak.
Yeah, cool.
And they're AB1s, so they're not that old. There's a lot of good stuff left in the wood, and also some virgin oak. American oak. That's predominantly it. We've learned a lot. I mean, our Colla range is a range of finished whiskies. So we've been actually innovating with finishes for the last 10 years more so, in terms of before we started the company. That was our thing. That was our hobby. But I do think a fresh new spirit should be started off with as close to good American oak as possible in terms of virgin American oak, to get all the good stuff out of the wood into the young spirit, and all the nasty stuff that you don't want hanging around out of the spirit back into the wood. And that's really what those first 3-5 years are very important from a young spirit's point of view. Then after that, we have plenty of ideas of how we're going to finish your whiskies.
I was going to say, right, you're basically building the foundation from which point you can do anything. Once you've got that, high quality, balanced spirit, aged 5-6 years or whatever it is, then it's at that point, I guess, you can decide which way you want to go and what you want to do, and release some of it as it is if it's good, and some of it put into different casks and finish and see how that goes.
Absolutely. We are going to start soon a single pot still campaign. And we are going to experiment going straight into some different types of wood with that, and it's purely innovative. It's purely experimental. We've no idea what it will.
It's exciting. This is what I love about the whiskey. I love about whiskey is it is a lot of fun, very experimental, and I think there's going to be some really exciting stuff coming out over the next 5 or 10 years, especially given what people are doing with whiskey over the last 5 years that have gone. I think there'll be some quite fascinating whiskey that comes out into the market over the next few years. So So tell us about, in terms of, tasting it, nosing it, the flavors, and what you would sort of expect. And like I said to Scott, obviously it's like anything, it's all subjective, right? No, not everybody's going to get the same flavors, same aromas, but I think it's always useful to get, a baseline understanding of the types of flavors, let's say, from the man that makes it, of what you would expect or what you would like to get from it.
Yeah, well, the 11-year-old, and thank you for picking that. I mean, this is kind of, I like them all. That they're all, some of them take a lot longer than others in terms of getting it right. This took a long time to get it right. There's a lot of trial and error in this because it's triple casked. First of all, it's a blend of single grain, 11-year-old single grain, and single malt. The single malt is actually 17 years old. Now it's 95% grain, 5% malt. Even just getting that blend and that balance, was tricky. But then it spent its first 8 years in ex-bourbon American oak casks, and then it spent 2 years in sherry Oloroso casks. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all. No, I definitely get that. How's the? We were talking about this a little bit last night when we did the tasting around the art of blending and how complex and difficult it can be to create a consistent product, and not to mistake the fact that even single malt whiskies are obviously blends of different casks from the same distillery, and so there's that art that sort of runs through the production, both single malt and blended whiskey. But how do you sort of foresee that as far as, I guess, scaling the brand? And I suppose one of the most difficult things being you need access to casks to be able to create the same liquid consistently and scale it at the same time. How do you sort of view that?
Yeah, and that can be the wasteful part of the process, and that was a challenge with the 11-year-old, because what we were trying to do here was, it's not a peated whiskey, but it has a peated finish. Okay, but I was trying to get a good balance of the sweetness from the sherry and some smokiness from the peat. Early on in my drinking whiskey career, I call it a career, I wasn't very focused on peat. We didn't have much variety in Ireland for peated whiskies. I've grown to like, as I got older, my palate's changing, I've gone to really like peated whiskies. But still in Ireland, a peated whiskey is quite a rarity. So I didn't want to go the full peated with it. I wanted to try let's try something where, with a peated finish combined with the sherry, the Oloroso, what could we get? Could we get a nice combination of sweetness with smoke? And that's what we were trying to do. Now, to get back to your question, we had a cracked in terms of the ex-bourbon oak, the sherry Oloroso butts, and then we tried a lot of, I won't mention brands, but a lot of brands, peated whiskey brands, some Scottish as well, to try and just get that wisp of smoke in there. And some were too little, some were too much. To get it spot on, there was a lot of wastage in that process, and that the whole process took about 3 years to get it right. But when we got it right, and we got even down to the distillery where the peated casks come from, we've been doing that then consistently over the last number of years. But it is a trial and error. It is a wasteful process at the beginning, but we're quite happy with the result, and we're getting a good reaction to it around the world. It's winning quite a lot of awards as well. So I'm pretty proud of it. It's a very complex drink to bring to the market.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic liquid, and I'm from a personal perspective, I think the combination of an element of peat and sherry cask, I think, works so beautifully together. Generally, like having that sort of rich sort of stewed fruit character that you can get from sherry casks, combined with that just hint of smoke, I think works so well. And so, yeah, I find it delicious. We've got Brian Stitch, who's got honey and caramel, hint of smoke. Enjoying that. Let me try. Sorry, I'm finding my feet with this system. My first tasting tonight. So, what else have we got? Let's have a look. Yeah, we've got a touch of water brings the smoke out of it, which Absolutely. I think is quite nice. Like I said, the ABV, is it 45?
It's 46. It's 46.
46.
All color range, except a few single casks, are 46. Yeah. It is one thing that we were trying to make sure it wasn't. We didn't want it to become too woody, because has spent time in 3 different cask types, 3 different woods. It is an 11-year-old in total. So it was trying to tone down on the woodiness, but still have an earthy aroma about it, especially on the nose with some toasted oak flavors coming through. But then on the taste, you're getting a bit of the smoke on the nose. You're getting that earthiness, maybe some wood as well. But then when you taste it, you're getting the sweetness coming through from the sherry. And that, there's a bit of salted citrus in there, the strong sherry notes, all arose or dry sherry notes. But then on the finish again, I'm going to try some now. On the finish again, you get a wisp of the smoke. So that was the trying to balance we're trying to get.
Well, I think you've certainly achieved that, and I think the mouthfeel on it is fantastic as well. It's deep, it's rich, it's heavy on the palate. So no, I think it's great. In terms of for both of you guys, one thing that I was interested in is in terms of, I guess, how to drink it and this sort of stuff. And obviously anyone can drink it however they bloody enjoy it, right? That's the whole point. But do you have any sort of recommendations as to how to drink either, the Bòcan or the Colla? Are these whiskies that can be mixed, let's say, or is it purely a case of having it by the dram, nosing it? Obviously we're talking about whiskies that retail at £60 plus a bottle. So the temptation to maybe mix that into a mixed drink might not be there. But how would you recommend people drink each of these drams? For anyone at home that's trying it for the first time. Yeah,
for the 11-year-old, I wouldn't. It's very good in a highball. So it actually won in Japan. It won a competition for best highball, I think 2 years ago. That's as far as I'd go with it.
No, I'd agree with you on that. In terms of, I can imagine. I've not made a highball with it, but I can imagine it being fantastic because
and on a hot summer's day, sitting out with a tall glass and this and a highball is just fantastic. Yeah. And like the extra water that does bring other aromas and flavors to it as well.
Yeah. For anyone watching who's not familiar with what a highball is, effectively a long mixed drink, normally with either still water or soda water, but it can be with could be with ginger ale or something else, but normally with water or soda water just to lengthen it. And I think obviously the highball is making and has been making for a few years now a massive comeback in terms of the way people are drinking whiskey, not just whiskey but a lot of spirits, brandies as well, and these types of things. So I think it's a great way, and I'd imagine Scott's probably got a similar sort of vibe and thought on that as well. If you were going to mix Bòcan.
Yeah, I think it can kind of do anything. It's a great dram. I think a lot of the time you're definitely going to want to start with giving it a wee nose because it's flavours you'll never have tried before. But with it being essentially a virgin oak cask, it works really well in those kind of old school prohibition whiskey cocktails. But one thing that I really love doing with it, and this goes against everything that you learn when it comes to nosing and tasting, but when it comes to enjoying a dram, crack the bottle into the freezer the night before, and when you drink it, it comes out almost resinous and sap-like. It's really, really an enjoyable drinking experience. Dreadful for writing tasting notes because you're locking a lot of the flavour in. But in terms of just sipping a really nice liquid, if you're watching a film or if you're outside having a barbecue in the warmer weather, it's brilliant.
No, I agree with that as well. I mean, not to mention brands that aren't the brands we're talking about tonight, but a long time ago, I used to work for Diageo, and the Johnny Walker Gold label serve was out the freezer, and I remember trying it for the first time. And I do think whiskey, I think it's a fantastic way to get people into the category as a serve. Because it sort of, holding, and don't get me wrong, I like drinking whiskey at room temperature, but holding the whiskey on the palate when it's frozen and keeping it there for a long time, basically it's like an evolution of flavour that develops on in your mouth and on your palate. And I think it can help people, experience whiskey in a way that just eases them into it, and of course, if you're doing that and you're having whiskey out of the freezer, why not have it with a chocolate fondant or some nice dessert as well, or something like that? But no, I do like that, and it's been a while since I've had whiskey like that. But no, it's a great shout. Well, look, I just want to say, I guess, last thing, thank you to both of you guys. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, it's been a pleasure, and thanks to everyone that's tuned in. It's my first online tasting that I've hosted. Probably not the last, I would say. I hope not. I've quite enjoyed it, to be honest with you, and it's been good fun. And so we'll have to. I think Tristan's going to have to fight for his spot back on the monthly tasting panel. But thanks to both of you guys. I appreciate it, and thanks to everyone that's tuned in.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, Thomas. Thank you.
Bye bye.